Ever wondered what it's like to find out that you and your whole family are autistic? Well, I'm going to take you through what our family's journey was. Hi folks, today I'll be taking you through what happened with our family as we discovered gradually that we were all in fact autistic, neurodivergent, and uncovered a range of interesting things along the way. So it started with our youngest, S, who's 14 now. At the time, they had just turned 7. We had a major life upheaval. We moved house, moved areas. I started back working full time. So before that, I'd been really lucky. I'd been able to stay at home with the kids. I was working part time at the weekends and studying for my masters while they were in school. We suddenly went from that situation to S now having to move house, move school, go to a whole new school with nobody that they knew, and me working full time further away from home. So they were actually having to go not only to school, but they had to go to a childminder before and after school, and only saw me, their dad and their brother for about an hour in the evenings before bedtime. This was a huge upheaval for everybody, obviously, but particularly for S. They were the youngest, obviously. They were only just 7, and until that point they had been doing pretty well. Unfortunately, it was hugely traumatic for S, and they started to exhibit a lot of symptoms that we noticed as being maybe a bit unusual. There were lots of meltdowns, lots of kind of fixed behaviours, repetitive behaviours, lots of sensory problems, lots of outbursts, very angry behaviour, all sorts of difficulties. And obviously they were affected by the move, by all of the changes. But these outbursts, these difficulties didn't settle down after, a few months. We waited, I think, basically all of year 2, which, if you're not in the UK, that's like age sort of 6, 7. Now S is the oldest in their year, so they were actually 7 the whole way through. So we took a sort of wait and watch approach through year 2. But these issues just weren't going away. And so I think it was around about the start of year 3, we approached school to ask if they had noticed any of these issues as well. Initially, they were quite surprised. S seemed to be holding things together pretty well at school, which, obviously now we know is autistic masking. But we were getting the brunt of it because they were coming home and essentially collapsing. They had no more spoons left to get through the rest of the day, and there were huge outbursts because they just couldn't manage anymore. Their day was too long for them. They were having to mask from 7:30 in the morning all the way through until like 6:30 in the evening. They barely had an hour or two before they had to go to bed, and it was just a massive issue for them. Once we had brought the possibility of, there being some differences there being some issues with school, we asked them obviously to keep an eye out, and they then started to collect evidence as well. They started noticing, I think particularly from their point of view, S had quite a lot of difficulties with social communication. So taking things very literally, not being able to make friends or interact with other children very well, and all of those kinds of things that, again, are part of the autistic profile. So it was, I think, towards the end of year 3 that we asked for the school to help us to start the process for an official autism diagnosis through the NHS. COVID happened in between all of this as well. So I will say there was, some mitigating circumstances. However, it took, over 2 years from the point of asking for an official autism diagnosis to be put in process to us actually getting the diagnosis. So we spent a good couple of years being pretty sure that this was what we were dealing with for S, researching a lot about it, talking with S a lot about it, and then we finally got the autism diagnosis in January of 2022, which was halfway through year 6 for S. Now, unfortunately, this long delay meant that S actually missed out on the cut-off point for being able to apply with their autism diagnosis to specialist autism schools in our area, which they really wanted to do. We had no idea that it would be such a long drawn out process. We knew obviously it would take some time, but we assumed maybe a year. So when we were applying for the autism assessment back in, year 3, start of year 4, we had no idea that it would be halfway through year 6 by the time that we would actually get the assessment, the diagnosis back. So from that point of view, that was really, really frustrating. S was massively devastated because they really did not want to go to a mainstream secondary school, high school. But that's where they are now. We're doing our best to make it work, but it is really still extremely difficult for them. So S was our catalyst, I guess. We obviously, as they were going through the process, we were reading, researching, talking, learning a lot about autism. And my husband, A, particularly noticed that he had a lot of similar traits, a lot of things in common with S. In our family, we describe it as different flavours, so different flavours of autism. He applied initially through the NHS and waited, months for a phone call, just to be told in the phone call, this wasn't even the assessment, this was just a phone call to say, oh, by the way, the official NHS waiting list for autism assessments for adults is currently standing at 7 years. So at that point, we decided to apply for a private assessment. My family were really helpful in helping us with the costs for private assessments as well. S had also been pointing out that they really thought that C and I were also autistic. We were both more convinced that we had ADHD. We're still convinced of it. But obviously there's quite a lot of overlap between the two conditions. So C and I, knowing that there's quite a strong genetic component as well, we decided to apply for a private assessment as well, but for both autism and ADHD. So we had, I think in January 2022, S was finally diagnosed with autism through the NHS. About March 2022, A had his autism assessment privately, and he did his online. So he met with somebody, filled out all of the forms obviously, and then met with somebody and had the actual interview part online. And he received his diagnosis just a couple of months after S. And then a couple of months later, C and I had our assessments, and they actually happened to be on the same day, at the same time, pretty much. So C sat in mine, I sat in his, and we both went through the assessment procedure together. We then, in the space of maybe 6 months, we all received our autism diagnosis. Oh, and a bonus, because obviously through all of the process, my family were helping out with the private assessment costs, and we were talking, I was talking to my mum particularly about all of this. She was really interested, and as she learned more about autism, guess what? She realised that she fit a lot of this as well. and she decided to get a private assessment over in Ireland for herself, and also received an autism diagnosis at the age of, I think she was 68 or 69 at the time. We got, all 5 of us got our autism diagnoses all within the space of maybe 5 or 6 months in the end. It is definitely genetic. So if you think that somebody in your family is autistic, it's a fair possibility that other people in the family may also be autistic. So don't be surprised if you end up discovering that more people are autistic than you originally thought. Along with autism, we also have a range of other neurodivergences, and kind of co-occurring conditions, co-occurring stuff. I've actually written it down because there's so much stuff I know I'll forget if I try to recite it here. So we suspect ADHD for both myself and the kids. My mum also suspects she might have ADHD too. Other stuff, anxiety and depression. Big co-occurring conditions with autism and ADHD and neurodivergence in general. I think largely due to the fact that the world just is not kind to us. It's not set up for people like us, and it is very stressful, very anxiety inducing to be going through life feeling different, feeling wrong. Other co-occurring stuff, coordination issues, which comes across as clumsiness, could be diagnosed as DCD. None of us actually have that diagnosis, but I do believe that a diagnosis of DCD or dyspraxia is kind of almost assumed within the diagnosis of autism. It just seems to be something that goes along with it. Giftedness is another one. Gastrointestinal issues. So this is a biggie. It's mostly TMI, but it is a massive thing, and it really does seem to be very, very strongly correlated with autism and neurodivergence in general, as are sleep issues. And I'm going to do probably a whole series of videos on sleep issues that we have had, but we are all rubbish with sleep. Another one that I didn't actually realise was correlated with autism until quite recently is hyperlexia. It's usually reading at a very early age, reading well above your, kind of grade level or age level, having a really wide vocabulary, sensory processing issues. I think this is fundamental to autism particularly, and probably most of the other neurodivergences, but we do tend to have a lot of sensory issues. So whether that be hyposensitivity, where we're sensory seeking, we need a particular sensory input, or hypersensitive, where everything is too loud, too bright, too scratchy, too everything. Sensory issues, big. Oh yes, auditory processing is a big issue. We love subtitles in our house. We watch all TV with subtitles now, which is fantastic, and I wish I had known about this years ago. I also wish real life had subtitles. It is extremely difficult for us to filter out background noise and focus on what's actually being said in a conversation. We also find it very difficult to take in information in an auditory way, so this is one of the reasons why we say, please write things down, or let me write that down. Auditory processing. And a nice little bonus, differences in gender experience. So as I may have mentioned, C, my oldest son, is trans. S is non-binary. Me, I don't really have a gender. I mean, I obviously know that physically I am a woman, and to save hassle, I suppose, I generally just kind of go along with that, but I actually don't feel gender. Other people talk about feeling like a man, feeling like a woman, feeling this, that, the other. No, I feel like a person, mostly. Sometimes I feel like an alien, mostly I feel like a person. That's about it. So that's another co-occurring thing. So obviously we have all sorts of these kind of co-occurring issues, conditions, stuff that goes along. Some of these might be considered neurodivergences, some are just other things that go along with them. I'm sure I'm forgetting stuff. There's bound to be stuff that I've forgotten. I'll probably do a whole separate video on this. There you go. That's the story of my family and our autism diagnoses and all of the other co-occurring neurodivergent things that go along with it. See you soon.